Hello, good morning. Welcome to day 10, I think, day 10 of our holiday club. So today we're going to be having a lot of fun with findings. So I'm going to be showing you how to make your own ear wires, your own clasps, chain, lots of essential things that is always handy to be able to create as a skill. What I tend to find is sometimes I will make a pair of earrings and I won't have the matching hooks in the same wire that I'm using. Um, I might have run out of silver sterling ear wires, and this is something that you can create yourself so you've got them always to hand. Same with the clasps. Sometimes being able to make a wire clasp, finish off a wire bracelet will really finish off your piece to a high standard. It's really nice to be able to create those types of findings rather than have to have a ready-made one. Ready-made ones are always handy, but hopefully this will give you something to add into your skill set. So if you want to come down on the mat with me, I'll show you all the different types of clasps and things we'll be doing today, and we'll just go through them one by one. So firstly, I'm going to make some little ear wires with you. Now, these are like French hooks. What's lovely about these is you can add on beads and crystals, whatever it is that you want. Now, I usually use a 3mm bead, and I would add on, say, a copper bead or a silver sterling bead. But if you're making earrings and you're using a particular bead, then you can add that particular bead in as well, and that will just add that little finishing touch. So these are some French hook ear wires that I'm going to be showing you how to make really easy. For that, I would use the 0.8 wire and then a little bit of weaving wire as well. So I'll show you how to make them, and they should come out pretty much exactly the same symmetrical wise. Now, in terms of your clasps, there's lots of different clasps that you can do. I'm going to be using the 0.8 wire again. Now, usually I do like to use a slightly thicker gauge of wire with a clasp to make sure that's nice and sturdy. So I would usually use a 1mm, maybe even a 1.2, but you can make a little clasp with the 0.8. And if you want to strengthen that again, you can just give it a little hammer. So we'll be making a variety of different kind of shepherd's hook clasps like this. So you can see they're all done with slightly different methods, and you can create your own size for that. And they would just hook in nicely to a little loop part as well that we'll be making. So that would go on your bracelet like so and hook together. So we'll be doing some wrapped loops to create those. Also, if you are using your 0.8 wire and you do want to thicken it up, then I'll show you how to make this one, which is just doubled over, and that adds that extra strength as well. That's a nice sturdy little clasp. And you can change the size up accordingly. So obviously if you've got a more delicate bracelet, you don't have to add these to wire bracelets. You could add them to whatever you want. You can attach them with a jump ring as usual. I'll also be showing you how to do these little, I call them S clasps. So again, you can hammer that, you can create that flatter texture. You can also add in a bead into the clasp if you want to, and they would just attach like so. Nice and easy to attach. And we'll also be doing some chain. Now, there's lots of different ways you can create chain. I've made this one quite large just so you can see, but we'll be making the same connectors over and over again, and there's just different ways that you can link these together. So this one is kind of a heart shape. This is exactly the same. They're just joined together in a different way. This one is probably my favorite. It's a really nice effect if you mix those metals. So here I'm using the 0.8 wire again, only cut in very small segments to create like little S shapes. And I've used the mixed metal in that. So you've got the gold coloured wire and the silver as well. And you can just join that together to make lovely little links in your chain. And again, my trusty favourite is just creating wrap loops. I love the fact that you can add beads into this, and you can make a piece of jewelry and your chain can really kind of draw that full piece together. So often I will use chain and I will add that technique in. So you can see here I've been able to add in the same rose quartz and same pearls that I've done on the front of my pendant. And I'm just creating some little links essentially to add into the chain. So it can really kind of finish a piece off. So lots of things to do. I think I'll start off with the ear wires. So to do that, I'm just going to move those bits up and out of the way. I'm going to take my 0.8mm wire and I'm going to cut 4 inches. So I'm going to straighten out my wire, either with my nylon coated pliers or with my fingers or whichever wire straightening tool you want to use. And I'm just going to cut 4 inches of that wire. So this is a really easy way to create some French hook ear wires and to be able to get them exactly the same, just using one piece of wire. So I've cut my 0.8 wire to 4 inches. And with my fingers, I'm just going to bring those ends together to find the center. And I'm going to push them together. I'm then going to come in with my pliers and I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure onto the end there, just to draw those wires closer together. So I've got this little loop at the top, and then with my fingers, I'm just gonna create that one piece of wire into a fold so they're running fairly parallel. And then I can just straighten that out again. So I've created this little loop with that one length of wire. Now you can use your round nose pliers or you can use your bail step pliers. I quite like using the bail step because it is the same on each step. It's not tapered like your round nose. Obviously, when you've got your round nose pliers, they are wider at the top and then they go smaller towards the ends. When you're using a bail step, it's the same thickness all the way through that step. I find that when you're turning something, you get that kind of equal turn throughout it all. But if you haven't got them, it really doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the smaller end. And if I was using my round nose pliers, I'd probably use around here on there. And I'm just going to turn that little fold over together into a loop. So this is kind of like I would be making an eye pin. What you'll see is it's in this kind of P shape. And I want it to sit more upright like a lollipop or an eye shape. So I'm going to come back in with my pliers and I'm just going to give that little bend backwards. And you'll see now I've got one pin which is sitting like this. So just turn that loop so the loop is sitting on top. Now I'm going to come in with a pair of my pliers and I'm just going to trim the very end of that curl open. And what that now has done has created 2 pins of equal length. So I can come in with my round nose pliers again, or my bail step pliers, and just close that little loop over fully. So you can see I've got a tiny little gap there where I've just trimmed it open. So I'm going to come back in with my pliers and just close that over. And now I can add on whatever bead that I want. Now you don't have to add beads to this, but I think it makes your work a little bit more unique. And as I say, if you're creating a pair of beaded earrings, then you can add that in. I would only use something small. I wouldn't really go any bigger than a 4mm. A 3 is a nice size, but you can do whatever you want really. So I'm adding on those little beads or crystals to the ends of my soon to be ear wires. And then I'm going to take my 0.4 wire and I'm just going to create a little coil. Now I'm only going to wrap maybe 7 or 8 times around. So I'm going to take it again fairly towards the end of my ear wire just to give myself something to hold on to. And I'm going to wrap that round. We'll go 7 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So all I've done is brought that wire around that pin or this base wire, and I've just created a little coil where the coils are sitting next to each one. So each wrap is sitting next to each other. And then I'm going to come in again with my cutters and I'm going to trim both of those ends off. So the tail end, where I attached it on, and with my pliers, I'm going to slide that down towards the very bottom of that loop and where that crystal bead is, but I'm just going to tuck those ends in. So with a pair of pliers, just kind of rotate it in your hand and make sure there's no sharp bits sticking out. If you need to kind of compress it a bit, you can do. So I'm just taking that wire and tucking in that little end part and sliding that back down. And I'm going to do the same on the other. So I'm going to take my 0.4 wire, going to position it over the 0.8, give myself a little tail end to hold on to, and I'm going to wrap 7 times. So I've created like a little spring. And again, coming in with my cutters, and I'm going to trim it off very close, making sure I'm just cutting that 0.4 wire. I'm not cutting the pin at all. Again, just coming in to tuck that down. So I've got rid of those little ends. Don't worry if your pins bend a little bit. So you only need a teeny tiny bit of that 0.4 wire just to create those coils. Just want to make sure that little end bit is fully flat. Now, if you want to stop that sliding up and moving, you can take your pliers and just give it a little bit of a press, and that should kind of fix it down a little bit and stop it sliding up and down. So I've now got my 2 pins looking like this. Okay, I'm now going to put a little bend in my pin, and this is going to create this part of the shape, so this angle. So to do that, I'm going to make sure that the opening of those loops are facing towards me. So I've got that little loop that we created at the beginning, and the opening to that is facing towards me. I'm going to bend that pin away from me. So with my pliers, I'm just going to create a little bend. It doesn't have to be fully 90 degrees, but just whatever it is really to kind of give you that bend. If it does move out of place, don't worry, just reposition it. And I'm going to do again the same with the other one. So that pin little loop is facing towards me. Going to hold it in position, and just above the coil that I've created, I'm going to bend a little bend that pin away from me. And you can line them up together, or you can bend them at the same time if you want, just to make sure you're getting that fairly the same. And to just reposition them back together, and I'm happy with that. Now, when I create the kind of loop with this, again, I'm going to use the bail step pliers because I want to create that turn, but I'm going to do them at the same time, and then I've got the same shape on both of them. So I'm gonna, this bit can be a bit fiddly just holding them both together, especially when you've added a pretty crystal or a bead on. But I'm just gonna position my ear wires in together, and I'm gonna position them. So I'm gonna be using this step here, so it's the second largest. So I'm gonna position it in between. I'm gonna take my other one as well if I can, and just line them up together. And then bringing them all the way over my pliers. Again, you can do that with your fingers, you can do it with your round nose, but by bringing them over together, I've created the same bend equally in my ear wire. And now what I'm going to do is either give it a little trim if I think it's a little bit long, or I'm going to take another pair of my pliers, got my ruler, and I'm just going to give it a little flick up. So I'm just taking the ends and giving that a little flick. And I've created my ear wires really straightforward. What you can do is you can file these ends down. So if you've got, you could use a bearing tool, or you could just use like a metal file. If you haven't got a particular jewelry file, that's okay. I've used a metal nail file before and it does the same. It's just to get any particularly sharp edges off. But if you're somebody who can say only wear silver sterling ear wires, then you can get a little bit of silver sterling wire and you can make your earring hooks and you can incorporate those beads in. You can use whatever wire you want. Obviously, everybody's different, so use a wire that's suitable and a metal that's suitable for you. But they are your ear wires, really easy to do. If you want to make those loops larger, again, just turn that loop when you bring it over. Maybe that one's been brought over the larger one. Really straightforward to do, and I think they look very, very sweet. So they are the ear wires, and now we'll start on some clasps. So as I say, there's lots of different ways you can create lots of different clasps. I'll show you like a little shepherd's hook first. So to do that, you're going to need two parts of your clasp, one to hook in to the other. So we're going to start with this one first. Now you can do a little wrapped loop on this, like I've done here, and you can add a bead in if you wish, or you can create a little loop opening, so it will just open and close like a jump ring, and you can add that onto your chain. So what I like doing with making my own clasps is you can make this part as large as you want. Obviously, you need to make sure that they're going to fit in together. But sometimes clasps can be a little bit fiddly because your kind of jump ring or whatever you're using can be quite small. So I'm going to take again my 0.8 wire. I think I'll do it in silver this time just to spice things up a little bit. I'm just straightening out my wire with my fingers. I'm probably going to cut, I'll probably cut about 3 inches. But again, it completely depends how large you want to make it. So I'm going to take a little length of wire, and the first thing I'm going to make is start to make a little loop like this. So I'm going to go probably maybe midway point on my wire. Again, you can use your bail step pliers or your round nose pliers, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to put a little bend in that wire, and I'm going to create a wrapped loop. So I've bent my wire into a 90-degree angle, and then I'm just repositioning my hand so that the pliers or my bail step pliers are sitting above and below. And then I can just bring that all the way around. Reposition my hand again. Okay, so I'm just creating that top loop. So it needs to make sure that whatever size I use, that I'm fairly happy that my clasp is going to sit inside of it. So I've just created that. Again, if you wanted to add a little bead on, you could do before you turned it. I don't think it's too late really to add on a bead. Let's see if we can straighten that back up and add on a little bead. Again, this just ensures that everything kind of ties in properly. So I'm just gonna straighten that up, see if I can add a little tiny bead on. Okay, so I'm going to create that kind of wrap loop shape again by bending over my wire. I'm going to use my bail step or my round nose pliers, bringing that all the way round. And then I'm going to create another little wrap loop just to fill that space between the top of the bead and my soon to be wrap. So again, you can keep your bail step pliers inside or your round nose pliers, or you can hold over the top with another pair of pliers just to keep that shape in place. And I'm just going to bring it round. Again, I'm just going to wrap a couple of times. Flip it over if it's easier. And just tuck that wire in. I've got that little loop at the top and the bottom. I can attach my jump ring or part of my bracelet, and then I'm going to make a little hook to go through it now. So to make my hook, I'm going to take, I only want quite a small one, so I'm going to take my 0.8 millimeter wire, and I'm going to cut about 2.5 inches of my wire. I've got tools absolutely everywhere. And I'm just going to create a little wrap loop along the bottom. Again, you can add that pearl on or that bead if you want to. So I'm going to go just above halfway, not fully halfway. I'm going to take my round nose pliers or my bail step, give it a little bend, reposition. And I'm just repositioning my hand so I can get that wire all the way around to create that little loop shape at the top. Again, you can pop your round nose in if you want to. You can use your fingers to start to turn that round, or you can guide it round with your tools. So I tend to hold it in my less dominant hand at this stage. And then with my dominant hand, all I'm going to do is just keep bringing that little bit of wire over and round to create a little wrap loop. So I'm going to wrap about 2 or 3 times, making sure that end is tucked in. So I've got a nice sturdy little wrap loop there. And now to create that like that kind of shepherd tuck clasp, I'm just going to give it a tiny little bend in one direction, just above that loop. And then I'm going to bring it round. So again, I'll use my bail step pliers just to create a little kind of rounded shape, but you can do it with your fingers. And I'm just going to bring that all the way round. Like that. And you can hammer this as well if you want to. I've hammered this one, so you can see I've kind of flattened out the edges. It's hard to kind of show it on the camera. And then I'm just going to come in with my round nose pliers, the very, very tip of them. And I'm going to give that a little curl at the bottom, curling it into itself, like so. So now I can hook on my clasp opening nice and easily. Right, if you want to do the same again, but to double up the wire, so if you're thinking I need a stronger clasp than that, and you've only got the 0.8 wire in, then I always find this technique really useful because it's very, very sturdy. So this time I would again take my 0.8 wire. That's all you need really for the full clasp. And I'm going to cut 5 inches this time. So I'm straightening it through my fingers. Gonna use my cutters to trim my wire. So I've got about 5 inches. And then at 1.5 inches from the end, I'm going to bend that wire over. So I've got 5 inches in total. At 1.5 inches, I'm just going to bend that wire over. Again, I'm going to do it with my fingers to begin with, and then I'm going to come in with my tools and just compress that down. So I've got quite a sharp bend, and that wire is now running parallel down the other side. And I'm going to make my wrapped loop just here where that wire finishes. So I'm going to create a little bend on the longer length of wire. And I'm only giving it a bend just so when I turn that loop, again, it's sitting fairly centered. Now this time when I'm going to wrap this loop, I'm going to wrap this wire over both ends, and that's going to join them together. So again, you can take your pliers to hold over that loop. I'm just going to bring it round with my fingers to begin with, and I'm just going to start creating those little coils. But as I'm doing it, I'm trapping both ends of the wire in place. So I just use my fingers really just to bring it round to begin with. If you want to use your tools, you can do. If you want to keep your loop in position, you can do. Give yourself something to hold on to. So again, I'm just bringing that round. And I'm going to do, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 coils. Really doesn't matter how many you do, as long as you've managed to capture both ends of that wire. So it's now a doubled over thick one. I'm going to come in with my cutters and trim any excess off. And again, tuck that down with my pliers. So I've now got this shape here. All I'm going to do now is create a little bend in this. So I could do that with my fingers, I can do it with my pliers, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to bring that over. So I've bent it, I would say I've probably bent it midway up. So the end of that kind of bend is now in line with the loop. And again, just with a pair of pliers, I'm going to come in and give that a little flick up. And I've now created a doubled clasp. You can straighten it up if you want to. And that will work exactly the same way. You can just fasten that on. You can make it smaller or larger. I've started with about 5 inches, and that gives me about this length. But again, if you want to make that smaller, just cut a smaller length of wire. If you want to make it larger, make a larger wire. Okay, I'll show you how to do the S clasp now. So again, for that, it just completely depends how large you want it in terms of how you're cutting your wire. So it's still using the 0.8, and I'm going to cut about 3 inches. So I've cut my wire. Just have a little sip of my drink. Okay, for this one, I'm just going to use my round nose pliers, and I'm going to create a little curl on either end, going in the opposite direction. So with my round nose pliers, I'm going to start to curl this up, just to curl it in on itself. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the opposite side in the other direction. So if it's easier, just turn it round and you can do exactly the same. So I'm just using the tip of my round nose pliers just to create two little curls, one going one way, one going the other. And what I want to do is I'm going to start to bend this. So these curls are now facing outward on the opposite side. So I'm going to go roughly into the center. I'm going to just hold it with my fingers and I'm going to start to create a little bend here by bringing that wire round so that curl is fairly ending up in the center. And then again, holding in the middle, going to create that bend. It's going to go in the opposite direction. And that's how easy that is to do. I would probably hammer that one. So if you've got a little jewellery hammer, you can just give it a little tap and that will start to flatten it out and add a little bit of strength to it. If you don't have a jewellery hammer, go and raid your toolbox because anything will do. All you're doing is putting a little bit of hardness into that wire by just hammering it. That is my S-clasp, and again that works in a similar way. You'd have the connectors either side for that one. So should we make some chain? Finish off with a little bit of chain, I think, and then again you can do whatever you want. Now I like wrap loops to create that chain, as I said, where is my example. I think that can look really, really pretty and it's really straightforward to do. You can use your 0.6 wire that you've got in your kit as well for this if you prefer. So you could use your 0.6 or you could use your 0.8. I'm going to cut, I'm just going to cut it by eye, to be honest. So I'm just going to cut a couple of inches. You can always make it smaller or whatever by just cutting that wire off. And it depends as well how many beads you're adding. I'm just going to do a little wrapped loop. I only need my connections to be fairly small. So whether you want to use your bail step pliers or your round nose pliers, I'm going to bring that all the way round. So again, I'm creating that little loop on the top. I'm going to pop my pliers back in just to give myself something to hold on to. Hold it in my left dominant hand. You can see how much softer this wire is. I'm using the 0.6 here. So you could probably do that with your fingers to bring that round if you need to. So I'm creating 3 coils. Just going to come in with my pliers, just push that coil down a little bit, just to neaten it up. You can trim off any excess, but just make sure you've tucked it right in, so you've got no sharp bits. So I've created a little wrap loop at the top. I'm then going to add on whatever beads that I want to. You can add one, you can add multiple. I do love the colour of these kind of gold and purple ones, so I'm going to add a few of those on. So what I tend to find is if you've created a pendant or whatever it is you're doing and you want a little bit of chain to kind of hang it on, you can really make that all tie in your piece together by using the same colour beads or the same beads. I think that will do lovely. So again, I'm going to start to create a little bend just above that last bead that I've added. Now, the bend that I'm creating is going to be, again, around a 90-degree angle, but I'm going to bend it above so I've got that space in between to wrap that wire around. So again, I'm going to make sure my loop is the same on either side. Just reposition my hand so I've got the ability to bring that wire through. And then I'm just going to wrap the end of that wire around by drawing it over. And I'm going to fill the space between the loop and the bead by wrapping. It's going to be about 3 times. Come in with my cutters. And then just flatten that down to make sure there's no spiky bits of wire. It's not going to catch on anything. So I've created my first wrap loop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to make these, but before I wrap that wire around, I'm going to connect them together. So you could make lots of these separately and you could just attach them with jump rings, or you could attach them with bits of ready-made chain if you wanted to. If you want to make them where they connect together, just make sure you connect them when you make that wrap loop. So again, I'm going to take a little bit of wire. Going to make my first wrap loop. So again, I'm going to give it a bend. Bring that wire around all the way into that nice lollipop shape. I'm using a thicker gauge of wire, I've just noticed. It'll still work, but I've gone back to the 0.8 instead of the 0.6 here. Bringing that round all the way. So I'm wrapping about 3 times. Just give it a little push up so those wraps are nice and neat and close to each other. Tucking that little end in. And then going to add on whichever beads that I want to. I think I'll just go for the same again. And that's what's the nice thing about these gauges of wire. Your beads fit on, they've got a nice size hole. So whether you're using 3mm or an 8mm bead, your hole's going to be large enough. Okay, so I'm going to start to make that shape again. So I'm going to give it a little bend. So I've got that space to create that wrap loop. And I'm going to bring it all the way around into that loop. But before I wrap it, I'm going to connect it onto my last one. So I'm just going to slide them on together. If you need to, you can use pliers just to kind of lift that up a little bit so you can attach it on. I'm going to hold over that loop with my pliers to hold it in place. And I'm going to bring that round either with my tools or my fingers to wrap the space in between the bead and the loop. Trim off the excess. And then just make sure that I'm tucking in that end close to that bead. So you can just keep going with that, and then you're making those connectors. And I think, you know, you could make bracelets that way as well. You don't have to be making, you know, chain for necklaces. You can do various different things with that. To make a general little chain like this, which I think looks very, very sweet. Again, you could link these together and you can have different kind of techniques. All I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to take my 0.8mm wire and I'm going to cut approximately 2 centimeters because I only want small little lengths. So again, you can strengthen it out with your fingers. I'm going to cut about 2 centimeters. I'm just holding it up against my ruler. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that length that I've cut and I'm just going to position that against my wire. So I'm cutting them fairly evenly. And I'm going to cut lots and lots of little lengths. It is a good way to use up little end bits of wire that you might have. So I'm cutting lots of little lengths at about 2 centimeters. I'm going to take my round nose pliers and I'm just going to create a little curl. So I'm curling it in one way and then on the opposite side I'm curling it the other way. So I'm creating kind of a little kind of little figure of 8 shape. And again, you can do these with your bail step pliers and get it perfectly even if you want to. I do tend to find they work nicely just by going by eye. But I'm using kind of the larger part of my round nose pliers for this. I'm not using the very smallest tips. I'm probably using about midway. So when I create that S shape or that figure of 8, those points on the curl kind of come in together in the center. And if it doesn't quite get there, you can just open it out again and make it a little bit larger if you need to. So I'm just going to do them by eye. And if you want to, you can hammer these to harden them. So if you want to use a thinner gauge of wire, you can do. And you can harden them with a little bit of a hammer. So I'm just creating a little curve going in both directions on that wire. You can come in and straighten it up a little bit just to create a little figure of 8. And it's something nice you can do, quite repetitive. As I say, if you've got little bits of wire left over, you know, you can do this while you're just sitting and watching your Christmas film or whatever it is that you've been doing when you've not been here with us in Bead Club. So I'm going to make quite a few of them. I like doing them. This one that I created was doing exactly the same, but with 2 different colours of wire. And I think that looked quite nice. So I'll just make a little pile of them. Obviously, the length of your chain is going to determine what you want. You could do these on a larger scale as well, but I think cutting about 2 centimeters just gives me quite a nice, delicate size. And then I'm just going to open them up and attach them together. So I'm going to take my pliers and I'm going to kind of open it like I would a jump ring. So I'm holding on to one side and then just giving it a little flick up and then attaching it onto the next, closing it back down. And then I've joined those 2 together. Again, if you just need to make sure that they're fully closed, give it a little flick open, attach the next one and close that back down. Open up the next end, slide that on and close it back down. So you're just then creating those little lengths and little links of chain, which you can, as I say, attach onto anything really, and you can use those clasps that we've used. The heart-shaped one that I did was again creating those little kind of S figure of 8 shapes in between, and I've just created like a little heart. So I've cut again about 2 centimeters, but if you want to make them bigger, you can do. So I'm going to take a little bit of my 0.8 wire. I'm going to trim a few of equal lengths. So as I say, I tend to just cut one and then line that up against the wire on my reel. So I'm getting fairly similar sizes. And then with my round nose pliers, I'm going to curl one end in. I'm going to take the other end and I'm going to do the same. So I'm curling it in the same direction. Like that. And I would make a little pile of them. And then with any pliers, my round nose or whatever, I'm just going to give that a little bend in the middle. Sorry if I'm not in shot. Just to push them up together to create that little heart shape. And again, you can hammer them if you want to strengthen them. So I'm just coming in with a fairly small part of my round nose pliers just to create those little curls onto the end. Then in with my pliers just to bend them up together to create a little heart shape. And then I would attach them together again with those little S's or little figure of eights by flicking them up and closing it over. And then on the other side. Doing the same, but you can attach these in various different ways that you want. This one has been doing the same, where I've made those little hearts and I've just brought them together with those little eights. This one I made on a larger scale just so you could see. I've positioned them again slightly differently, so they're kind of facing each other, and those little S shapes are just linking them together that way. So lots of different things you can do. You can just play about with your chain. You can make any shape you want, really. You're just making links to join them together. And don't be afraid to, experiment with them. So you could add various different types of chain as long as you've got those equal lengths. You've got various different clasps which will work for different projects. And you've got your ear wires. So I think that's pretty much everything. I've showed you quite a few different things, hopefully, in the hour. Has anybody got any questions? Oh, you're most welcome, Vicky.